Hello again, YouTube. Lovell is prior enlisted Marine, a history buff, and just generally somebody who does a lot of research. And this one's going to be an explains why video. While yes, the Russians have initiated a new offensive in the eastern part of Ukraine, I still firmly believe that things are not going well for the Russians. I've actually seen a video recently from Artore where he has actually explained that they have used chemical weapons in Mariupol. It is a city that has been under siege pretty much from the beginning. It has been surrounded, but has yet to fall, and there's actually been quite a bit going on there. It's in eastern Ukraine, which has more support for Russians than anywhere else in the country. It's actually been part of the Donbass region, which has been under has been under pretty much constant conflict since the the fall of the Crimea region. Wow. And with that being said, one would not be using chemical weapons to dislodge the enemy if things were going well. It is a weapon of desperation. The Germans in World War I used it to try and break up the stalemate. And similarly, it was used by everybody, as the Allies as well as the Germans later on in the war. But the Germans were the ones to use it en masse first to try and break the stalemate that was trench warfare. The Russians would not be using these weapons unless they were desperate. It's like they are trying to make up for where they can't break the siege otherwise. And at the same time, this combined with other known atrocities, such as attacking civilian convoys that are trying to leave the area and leave it to the combatants to settle it amongst themselves, has actually left it so that way, well, in all honesty, it does not present a good image. Even if somebody was supporting Russia before all this, they probably might not support them so much now. And it would go, another thing about a bit of a was another bit of the history lesson dating back to the First World War is when Germany crossed into Belgium. They committed a few war crimes of their own, a few atrocities of their own. And here in the United States, we actually had a significant German American population that was initially, when the war was declared, they were actually rooting for Germany. But when they went through Belgium attacking what was then a neutral country, as it appeared to be, and committing atrocities along the way, the German American support faded rather quickly. So, in the East, Russian military forces still have a major problem. They're actually going to lose support where they already have it. And it's going to make it so that way more Russian supporting Ukrainians are not likely to support this because word's going to get around. Whether it's Ukrainians talking to Russians supporting Ukrainians or Russians who have seen this and done this, who might not feel so kosher with it themselves, as are talking to these Russians supporting Ukrainians. It's and it's just not going to help their cause any. In fact, it probably hurt it quite a bit. So it's like that in itself, actually stands to make it so that way where they did have support in the past, they're not going to have it now, and they might even have some of some, basically, if nothing else, mutinies or even an insurrection behind the lines, which insurrection, insurgencies, anything like that, that's not going to help their cause hardly at all. As, especially if it comes from people who would otherwise support them. So, I maintain that these people are making some catastrophic mistakes. And now they've brought a general in to take over the theater who's known for his ruthlessness, known for his brutality, who's basically a butcher, and to try and bring things under control and into Russia's favor. And yes, there is a point or more where you have to stop being nice. It's like, oh yeah, if I'd ever gotten my gun sight on the bomb maker in Iraq, I would have happily put him out of his misery. That would have been one of those things where I just never would have even thought twice about it. I would have slept rather soundly at night after the fact. Because the bomb maker, he was a pretty bad dude. I mean, he makes a bomb, somebody makes a suicide vest out of it, the suicide bomber goes, blows somebody up, and 10 people die. I looked at it this way: if I put a bullet right between his eyes, well, that's at least one more bomb he's not going to make. And unfortunately, I never got that shot. I would have been the only real bad guy I ever went to Iraq to actually go after. And when it comes down to it, it's like, no, 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 no. It's like one of the things that I personally dreaded while I was in Iraq, and I still think about from time to time. I'm fortunate that this one turned out rather well. Was when I actually had to suspect a kid who couldn't have been more than 8 years old at the time of being a threat. He had his arms behind his back. We were rolling away slowly in our MRAPs. And granted, he would have had to have basically the arm of a professional outfielder to make it happen. Or would have had to have a really good aim with a pistol in order to be any sort of threat at all. But I could not take the chance that he didn't have a grenade or a pistol that he was going to shoot at us. So I lined up my gun sight, which that was the M240 medium machine gun. I was ready to take him out. And fortunately for me, I had the clear thought of mind to recognize that the threat was minimal. That even if he did have that pistol or that grenade, that there was a very unlikely chance that he would actually cause any serious damage to me or anybody around me. And because we were all buttoned up in our vehicle except for me poking my head out of the turret, I was the only one that actually was under any real threat. So even if he had gotten a lucky shot, it would have only gotten me. So I took the time to take a breath, think about what it was, and I decided, okay, I'm going to wait and see what this kid has, because I've got him dead to rights. And it turned out it was a rock. As soon as that situation was over, and I took it, and I had a chance to collect my thoughts, I was yelling at that kid. I was not very happy with that kid at all. It's like, because I personally hated the idea of having to shoot the little guy. But I had to suspect him for being a threat at the time. And it's like it was only the right thing to do. And from time to time, I still think about him. I mean, Iraq was 14 years ago. That would make him about 22 years old today if I was right about his age. Wow. He probably has kids of his own by now. And, whew, I never wanted to do that. And that's because, well, honestly, a dead little kid doesn't. It's like it's a horrible thing on one's conscience to have. Not to mention, it just doesn't look good. And it's like I never ever wanted to do it, but I understand why I would have had to if I had to. If he was a threat, he was a threat. I was going to take him out. But it's also like the PR war that was being done in Iraq. One of the things that was actually told to me in boot was of a platoon that had actually chased three insurgents into a building. They realized those insurgents didn't duck in the building just randomly. That they had tank support available and they had a rocket launcher in the platoon, and the lieutenant and the platoon commander was just not too keen on just kicking down the door and going in because it could be booby trapped. So he calls up the tank, blows open the side of that particular building, and there's a bunch of dead little girls inside. Well, it was meant for the benefit of CNN, honestly. So that way the cameras could actually see it and they could actually go, American commits war crime, because they see tank blown open inside of building, dead little girls. Well, unbeknownst to CNN at the time, it was a case of where those little girls had actually been shot one round 7.62 each. They were shot by the insurgents' buddies and left there to be staged for exactly a moment like this. So they killed their own people in order to make us look bad. And when it comes down to it, anything that you actually do that actually makes you look bad, like, it's hard to argue when you see a weapon system that fires thermobaric weapons and you see it being fired. You can't argue against that. You might be able to argue that the chemical weapons weren't used, but it's really difficult to argue it once you've already crossed lines like that. So this actually reeks of desperation that the Russians think they should have won this weeks ago. And they're not having it there, so they're having figure the only way to actually win this is to beat the Ukrainians into submission. And this potential chemical weapons attack just seems like an additional uh, act of desperation. It's like they aren't winning this by conventional means, so they're trying to get the ball rolling again in their favor, and the Ukrainians aren't letting them. It's like even with something like this, the Ukrainians are showing no sign of weakness, and more weapons are pouring in across the Polish border every single day, sometimes by the hour. And the Ukrainians are getting some big guns. It's like, yeah, I fully expect that if they get all of the equipment that's been promised to them thus far, that they would not only be able to knock the Russians out of Ukraine, but they might even be able to create a buffer zone. And honestly, I'd prefer that it be, say, a 50-mile buffer zone, because that'd be a pretty good area to have a nice little battle that's outside of where your civilians live. And it would actually make it so that way you could have a pretty good tank on tank engagement at that point without the Russians being able to actually hurt your civilian populace at all without firing, say, missiles dead at cities, which, again, reeks of desperation. So, I still believe the Russians are losing this. They are losing it badly. And that being said, it is a good thing that they are, although all of this bloodshed, I still maintain, could have been avoided if we had just practiced energy dominance. And I've honestly come up with a decent number on that. What would it be like if we were producing, say, we use roughly 20 million barrels of oil per day? What would it be like if we were to produce 120 million barrels of oil per day and we exported most of it? And instead of depleting our oil reserve, our strategic oil reserve, we were using it to replenish our strategic oil reserve. Make it so that way we have a month or more of strategic oil reserves to basically fight with, because that's what the strategic oil reserve is for. It was meant in the event of World War III. And so far, World War III hasn't happened. Right now, we have a regional conflict in Ukraine. And we do have other actors that are being aggressive, but unfortunately, I'm not a politician. I do not set policy. I am not the president, so I can't fix this. So, but I am also looking at this through the eyes of a warrior. One cannot look back, one has to look forward. I can only see the situation as it is evolving right now and how things are going. At this point, there are some parts of the front between the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians still attack weak points. The siege itself is of Mariupol, if they can actually get to it, they can actually break that siege. But I would actually prefer that they work on small, thin salients that are still in the line and all up and down the front. And that way they can actually engulf or surround an enemy force and actually force surrenders. Or if they have to, eliminate that force altogether. And those are relatively obvious targets, but that is where I think the Ukrainians are going to go with this. But I do believe Russia is losing and still losing badly, because why else would they use anything so desperate as thermobaric weapons or, say, chemical weapons? I mean, both of those are very nasty weapons, and in fact, both are considered war crimes. It's like you don't use weapons that will lose you support if you are already winning. You don't need to. It's like they're not in the don't screw it up phase, they're in the oh crap, we need to figure something out phase. So, that being said, I've been Lovell. You guys have been awesome. And I hope you guys have yourself a good day now.